Touch her and face me. The mountain man protected the poor obese girl that everyone bullied. The autumn wind swept through the small frontier town of Birchwood Hollow in 1847, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Margaret Hayes stood at the edge of the town square, her worn brown dress straining against her heavy frame as she clutched a basket of mending to her chest like a shield. At 19, she had learned to make herself invisible, or at least to try. "Look, it's the mountain blocking the sun again." The voice cut through the afternoon air, followed by cruel laughter. Margaret didn't need to turn around to know it was Thomas Brennan and his gang of idle young men who spent their days loitering outside the general store. She had heard variations of this mockery countless times. Her cheeks burned with familiar shame as she quickened her pace, the basket's wicker handle digging into her palms. The few townspeople on the street averted their eyes, some out of pity, others out of discomfort. No one ever intervened. That was the unspoken rule of Birchwood Hollow. Margaret Hayes was fair game. "Where are you waddling off to, Maggie? Afraid you'll eat the whole bakery if you get too close?" Another voice, higher pitched. That was Samuel, the baker's son, whose cruelty somehow stung worse because his father had always been kind to her. Margaret's vision blurred with unshed tears. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not again. Not today. She had cried enough tears to fill the creek that ran through town, and still they came for her, day after day, year after year. The harassment had started when she was 12, after her mother died, and grief had driven her to seek comfort in food. Her father, a defeated man who spent more time with whiskey than with his daughter, had stopped noticing her except to complain about the cost of feeding her. By 14, she was doing mending and washing for the town's families, trying to earn enough to keep their small cabin from falling into complete disrepair. "Margaret, wait, child!" Mrs. Chen, the Chinese seamstress who ran the town's only proper dress shop, hurried toward her. The elderly woman's kind face was creased with concern. She was one of the few people in Birchwood Hollow who treated Margaret with genuine respect. "Don't mind those fools," Mrs. Chen said softly in her accented English, placing a weathered hand on Margaret's arm. "Their words are empty as their character." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have your mending finished. I hope the stitches are satisfactory." "Your stitches are always beautiful. You have skilled hands and a good heart." Mrs. Chen pressed a few coins into Margaret's palm, more than the work was worth. "Buy yourself something nice, a ribbon perhaps, or some of that tea you like." Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Kindness, when it came, always undid her more completely than cruelty. As she made her way toward the edge of town where her cabin stood, she heard the commotion before she saw it. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground, and then a voice she didn't recognize, deep, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its calm authority. "Touch her and face me." Margaret rounded the corner to see a scene that would be burned into her memory forever. A massive man stood between her and Thomas Brennan's gang. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the narrow street. His long, dark hair was tied back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of winter ice. He wore buckskin and fur, and across his shoulders sat a lynx, not a house cat, but a genuine wild lynx with tufted ears and intelligent amber eyes. The lynx's gaze was fixed on Thomas with an intensity that made the young man take an involuntary step backward. "We weren't doing nothing," Thomas stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "Just having a laugh with a woman who never laughed back." The stranger's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I've been in this territory for 3 hours. In that time, I've watched you mock her twice, trip a child carrying water, and kick a dog that came too close to your boots. In my experience, men who prey on the weak are cowards at their core." Samuel opened his mouth to protest, but the lynx's ears flattened against its skull, and a low growl rumbled from its chest. The sound was primal, predatory, and utterly effective. The gang scattered like autumn leaves in a strong wind. The stranger turned to Margaret. She found herself frozen, unable to move or speak. Up close, he was even more imposing, but his ice-blue eyes held no judgment, no mockery. Just a quiet assessment that somehow felt respectful. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Margaret shook her head, still clutching her empty basket. The lynx on his shoulder regarded her with what could only be described as curious interest, its pink nose twitching as it scented the air. "My name is Nathaniel Thorne. This is Luna." He reached up to scratch behind the lynx's ear, and the big cat leaned into his touch with obvious affection. "I've taken the old trapper's cabin up in the high country, the one at the edge of the pine forest." "I know it," Margaret managed, her voice little more than a whisper. "Mr. Donnelly's place. He passed last winter." "So I was told." Nathaniel's gaze was steady, patient. He made no move to come closer, seemed to understand that his size and sudden intervention might be overwhelming. "I'm sorry for interfering, but I spent 10 years in the Northern Territories. I learned that civilization is measured not by how we treat the strong, but by how we protect the vulnerable." Margaret felt tears prickling at her eyes again, but these were different, not tears of shame, but of something she couldn't quite name. Relief, perhaps, or the strange sensation of being seen as a person rather than a target. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate but sincere. "I'm Margaret. Margaret Hayes. Miss Hayes." He nodded respectfully, as though she were a lady in a fine parlor rather than an overweight woman in a worn dress standing in a dusty street. "If those boys bother you again, you let me know. And if I'm not around, Luna has a long memory and sharp teeth." The lynx yawned, displaying an impressive set of fangs, and Margaret found herself smiling despite everything, a small, tentative expression that felt rusty from disuse. Nathaniel tipped his hat and turned to go, the lynx balanced perfectly on his broad shoulders. Margaret watched them disappear up the mountain path, this strange man and his even stranger companion, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not love. It was far too soon for that, but perhaps the first fragile seed of hope that the world might contain more kindness than cruelty after all. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the cabin she shared with her absent father, Margaret pulled out the small leather journal she kept hidden beneath her mattress. "By candlelight," she wrote. "Today, someone stood up for me, not out of pity or obligation, but because he believed it was right. He didn't see me as a burden or a joke. He saw me as a person worth protecting. I don't know what to do with this feeling, this strange warmth in my chest that isn't shame or hunger. Is this what it feels like to have your humanity acknowledged, to be treated with dignity? I want to remember this moment, to hold it close on the days when the world becomes cruel again. Because I think perhaps I've been so busy surviving that I forgot I deserved to be treated like a human being." The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains in white by mid-October. Margaret had always dreaded winter. The cold seeped through the cabin's poorly chinked walls, and her father's drinking grew worse when he couldn't work the few odd jobs that kept them marginally fed. But this year, winter brought unexpected changes. 3 days after their first encounter, Margaret found a haunch of venison hanging from her cabin's porch beam, wrapped in clean cloth. There was no note, but she knew. Her father, in one of his rare sober moments, merely grunted and said, "Mountain Man's making sure we don't starve. Strange fellow, but fair enough." A week later, she discovered a cord of split firewood stacked neatly beside the cabin. Again, no note. Just the quiet kindness of someone who asked for nothing in return. Margaret struggled with this. She had learned to navigate a world where every kindness came with strings attached, where charity was a weapon wielded to remind her of her place. But Nathaniel Thorne's gifts felt different, thoughtful, respectful, asking nothing of her. She decided she would return the favor. It took her 3 days of nervous planning before she finally baked a loaf of bread. Not much, but her mother's old recipe, the one thing she made well. She wrapped it carefully and set out for the mountain cabin just after dawn, when the world was quiet and the risk of encountering her tormentors was lowest. The path up to the old trapper's cabin was steep, and Margaret had to stop several times to catch her breath. Her body protested the climb, but she pushed forward, determined. When she finally reached the clearing where the cabin stood, she found Nathaniel chopping wood. Luna stretched out on a sun-warmed rock nearby. He looked up at her approach, and she saw surprise flicker across his weathered face. He set down the axe immediately, wiping his hands on his buckskin pants. "Miss Hayes, this is unexpected." His tone was neutral, but not unwelcoming. Margaret thrust the bread toward him, her face burning. "I wanted to thank you for the meat and the firewood. You didn't have to do that." Nathaniel took the bread, handling it with a care that made her throat tight. "I didn't do it to be thanked, but I appreciate this. Fresh bread is a luxury up here." Luna had risen from her rock and was approaching Margaret with cautious curiosity. The lynx moved with liquid grace, her large paws silent on the forest floor. Margaret froze, unsure of the protocol for encountering a wild cat. "She wants to meet you properly," Nathaniel said. "Hold out your hand, palm down. Let her scent you." Margaret did as instructed, her hand trembling slightly. Luna sniffed delicately, her whiskers tickling Margaret's fingers, and then, to Margaret's astonishment, the lynx rubbed her head against Margaret's hand, a gesture unmistakably feline and affectionate. "She likes you," Nathaniel observed. "Luna is particular about people. Took her 2 years to warm up to me." "How did you—" Margaret gestured at the lynx, unsure how to phrase the question. "Find her or convince her to stay?" Nathaniel smiled, the expression softening his harsh features. "I found her as a kit, maybe 8 weeks old. Her mother had been killed by trappers. She was starving, half frozen. I fed her, kept her warm, and when she was strong enough, I tried to release her back into the wild." "She came back?" Margaret guessed. 3 times. Finally, I realized she'd chosen me as much as I'd chosen her. We've been partners for 6 years now." He looked at Luna with obvious affection. "She hunts on her own, comes and goes as she pleases, but she always comes back." Margaret knelt down, emboldened by Luna's acceptance, and carefully stroked the lynx's soft fur. The big cat leaned into her touch, purring, an unexpectedly domestic sound from such a wild creature. "Would you like some coffee?" Nathaniel asked. "I was about to take a break anyway." Margaret hesitated. Accepting felt dangerous, like stepping onto unfamiliar ground, but something in his patient demeanor, in Luna's warm presence, made her nod. The cabin's interior was simple but surprisingly well maintained. Nathaniel had clearly spent time making it comfortable. Fresh chinked walls, a good stove, and shelves lined with books. Margaret's eyes widened at the books. She had 3 at home, all of them her mother's. "You read?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course he read. "It's a long winter up here. Books are good company." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the liquid dark and fragrant. "You're welcome to borrow any you like." They sat at his rough-hewn table, Luna settling at Margaret's feet, and for the first time in years, Margaret felt something like peace. Nathaniel didn't press her with questions or demand she explain herself. Instead, he talked about the mountains, the wildlife he'd observed, the way the seasons changed at high altitude, the medicinal plants that grew in the summer meadows. "My mother was Crow," he said at one point, his voice matter of fact. "She taught me to read the land, to understand that everything in nature has purpose and balance. The white trappers and traders I grew up around taught me to read books. Between the two, I learned that knowledge comes in many forms." "Is that why you left civilization?" The question escaped before Margaret could stop it. "Sorry, that's not my business." "It's all right." Nathaniel refilled her coffee. I left because I watched too many good people destroyed by greed, for gold, for furs, for land that was never theirs to take. I watched my mother's people pushed from their hunting grounds, watched trappers slaughter animals by the hundreds just for their pelts, leaving the rest to rot. I decided I wanted no part of it. Margaret listened, fascinated. Here was someone who had chosen solitude not out of defeat, but out of principle. It was a perspective she had never considered. "What about you?" he asked gently. "Why do you stay in Birchwood Hollow when the town treats you so poorly?" The question hit her like a physical blow. No one had ever asked her that. They assumed she stayed because she had no choice, because she was too weak or too stupid to leave. She struggled for words. "I don't know if I have a choice. My father needs someone to care for him, even though he doesn't seem to care about me. And I'm not sure anyone else would want me. At least here, I know what to expect." "That's not living," Nathaniel said, his voice gentle but firm. "That's surviving. There's a difference." Margaret felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. "Easy for you to say. You're strong. You can do as you please. Strength comes in many forms." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "The fact that you get up every morning and face a town that's cruel to you, that you keep working and surviving despite everything. It takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Don't mistake endurance for weakness, Miss Hayes." The words settled into Margaret's chest, warm and unfamiliar. She had never thought of her survival as courage. It was simply what she did because she had no other option. They talked for 2 more hours. Nathaniel told her stories of the Northern Territories, of winters so cold that boiling water froze before it hit the ground, of summers where the sun barely set and wildflowers carpeted entire valleys. Margaret found herself sharing things she had never told anyone: her love of reading, her mother's old recipes, the way she sometimes imagined leaving Birchwood Hollow and starting over somewhere no one knew her. "Why don't you?" Nathaniel asked. "Because I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if it's worse somewhere else? What if I'm just as unwanted everywhere I go? Or what if you find a place where you're not judged by your appearance? Where are you valued for your skills and your character?" He stood, moving to one of his bookshelves. "Here, take this." He handed her a worn copy of Walden. "It's about a man who left society to live deliberately, to figure out what mattered. Maybe it'll give you some things to think about." Margaret accepted the book with trembling hands. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." When she finally left, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. Luna walked her part way down the trail, the lynx's presence somehow protective. At the edge of the clearing, the big cat stopped and chirped, a surprisingly bird-like sound, before bounding back toward the cabin. That night, Margaret wrote in her journal, "Today I learned that kindness doesn't have to be transactional, that someone can give freely, expecting nothing in return. Nathaniel Thorne is unlike anyone I've ever met. Quiet, thoughtful, carrying wounds I can only guess at, yet somehow more whole than anyone in Birchwood Hollow. And Luna, strange as it sounds, made me feel protected, not pitied, protected, as though I matter enough to guard. I've started reading Walden. Already these words speak to something in me I didn't know existed, the possibility that I could choose a different life. But can I? Do I have that strength?" Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Margaret would make the climb up the mountain twice a week, always bringing something: bread, mended clothes, herbs she'd gathered. Nathaniel would have coffee ready, and Luna would greet her with increasing affection. They talked about everything and nothing: books, the changing weather, memories of lost loved ones, dreams that seemed impossible. Slowly, Margaret began to see herself through Nathaniel's eyes, not as the fat girl everyone mocked, but as a person with value, with skills, with thoughts worth hearing. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. And in the quiet of his mountain cabin, with Luna purring at her feet and Nathaniel's steady presence across the table, Margaret began to believe that maybe, just maybe, She deserved kindness after all. December brought a brutal cold snap, and with it, Margaret's father's final descent into alcoholic fury. She had come home late one evening after delivering mending to Mrs. Chen, her fingers numb with cold despite her worn gloves. The cabin was dark except for the dying fire, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. Her father sat at the table, an empty whiskey bottle at his elbow, his face flushed and eyes glazed. When he looked at her, there was nothing but rage in his expression. "Where's the money?" he demanded. "What money, Papa?" Margaret set down her basket carefully, trying to keep her voice calm. "Don't play stupid with me, girl. I know you've been earning. Where's the money?" He stood, swaying dangerously. "I spent it on food and firewood so we wouldn't freeze." Margaret's heart pounded. She had seen her father drunk countless times, but never quite like this, never with this edge of violence. "Liar. You've been spending it on yourself, getting ideas above your station, going up that mountain to visit that savage and his demon cat." He took a step toward her. "Think you're too good for your own father now?" "Papa, please, I haven't—" His hand struck her face with enough force to snap her head sideways. The pain was shocking, not just physically but emotionally. Her father had been neglectful, dismissive, cruel in his indifference, but never violent. Not until now. "You're worthless," he snarled, "just like your mother. At least she had the decency to die and stop being a burden. But you just keep eating and taking up space and costing me money." Something inside Margaret cracked. Years of abuse, from her father, from the town, from herself, suddenly crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. This wasn't her fault. None of it had ever been her fault. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice shaking but determined. Her father laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Where will you go? Who would want you? You think that mountain man is going to take you in? He's just being charitable, girl. Probably feels sorry for you, like everyone else." The words hit their target. Margaret had always feared that Nathaniel's kindness was pity, that she was just another creature he'd rescued out of obligation rather than genuine care. But even if that were true, it was still better than this. She grabbed her mother's journal, the few items of clothing she owned, and the book Nathaniel had lent her. Her father shouted after her, but she was already out the door, running through the snow-covered streets of Birchwood Hollow in the dark. She didn't think about where she was going until she was already on the mountain path, her lungs burning with cold air and exertion. The climb was treacherous in the dark, snow obscuring the trail, but she pushed forward with desperate determination. Luna found her halfway up, appearing out of the darkness like a guardian spirit. The lynx chirped urgently and stayed close as Margaret climbed. She could see the cabin's windows, glowing warm yellow in the darkness. The sight made her stumble, and suddenly all the strength drained from her body. She collapsed in the snow just short of the clearing, unable to take another step. Luna's distressed yowl brought Nathaniel running. He appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and was beside her in seconds. "Margaret, what happened?" His hands were gentle as he helped her up, supporting most of her weight. "I couldn't stay there anymore," she gasped. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. I'll leave in the morning. I just need—" "Stop!" His voice was firm. "You're freezing and hurt. Everything else can wait." He carried her into the cabin, actually lifted her despite her size as though she weighed nothing, and set her carefully in the chair nearest the stove. Luna pressed against her legs, providing warmth and comfort. Nathaniel moved efficiently, stoking the fire, heating water, finding blankets. It wasn't until he brought her hot tea and saw her face in the full light that his expression darkened. "Who hit you?" Margaret's hand went automatically to her swelling cheek. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." There was something dangerous in his voice now, controlled but absolutely lethal. "Was it your father?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. And then, finally, after years of holding it in, she broke. great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, releasing years of pain and humiliation and loneliness. Nathaniel knelt beside her chair and simply held her hand, saying nothing, just being present while she fell apart. When she could finally speak again, the whole story poured out, not just tonight, but everything. Her mother's death, her father's neglect, the town's cruelty, the way she'd internalized every insult until she believed she deserved them, the fear that she would never be anything more than the fat girl everyone mocked, the terror that kindness was always temporary, always conditional. "I hate myself," she whispered finally. "I hate what I see in the mirror. I hate that I let them make me feel worthless. I hate that I'm weak." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and sure. "You're not weak. You're wounded. There's a difference. A wounded animal isn't weak. It's fighting to survive. But wounds need time to heal, and you can't heal in the same environment that created the wounds in the first place." He stood, moving to the window. "I have a proposition for you. Stay here, not as a guest, not as charity, as a partner. This cabin is too big for one person anyway, and Luna has decided she likes you. Help me maintain the place, hunt, and prepare for winter. In return, you have a safe place to heal, to figure out who you are without the weight of that town's judgment." Margaret stared at him, unable to process the offer. "Why would you do that?" "Because I see in you what took me years to find in myself, the strength to survive despite everything trying to break you. Because Luna trusts you, and her judgment is better than most humans. And because everyone deserves a place where they can be themselves without fear." He turned back to face her. "I'm not offering this out of pity. I'm offering it because I believe you have value even if you don't see it yet." "What if I never see it?" The question came out small, frightened. "What if I'm too broken?" "Then you'll be broken in a place where no one will hurt you for it. And maybe, given time and space, you'll start to heal." He paused. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't about me rescuing you. This is about you choosing to save yourself. I can offer shelter, but the work of healing, that has to come from you." Margaret looked down at Luna, who had climbed into her lap despite her size, purring with determined affection. She thought about the cabin in Birchwood Hollow, cold and loveless. She thought about her father's rage, the town's mockery, the daily humiliation that had become so normal she'd forgotten it wasn't inevitable. And she thought about Nathaniel's words. "You're choosing to save yourself." "Yes," she said, "I'll stay, but I'll earn my keep. I won't be a burden." "Partners," Nathaniel confirmed. "We help each other. That's how it works up here." That night, Margaret lay in the cabin's small second room, the one Nathaniel had immediately offered her, and wrote in her journal, "Tonight, I ran. Not because I'm a coward, but because I finally realized that staying was killing me. Papa's hand on my face hurt less than his words, and both hurt less than the slow death of my spirit that Birchwood Hollow has been inflicting for years. Nathaniel says I'm not weak. I want to believe him. I want to believe that leaving takes courage, that choosing my own survival matters. He says I'm choosing to save myself, but I'm terrified. What if I can't? What if I'm so damaged that healing is impossible? What if the cruel voices in my head are telling the truth? Still, I'm here. In this cabin on the mountain, with a man who treats me with dignity and a lynx who purrs in my lap. It's more than I've had in years. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's where healing starts. With enough? The next morning, Margaret woke to find fresh snow falling and the cabin warm. Nathaniel was already up making breakfast, and Luna was curled by the fire. When he looked at her, there was no pity in his eyes, just quiet acceptance. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." And in that simple exchange, Margaret took her first step toward believing she might deserve simple kindness after all. Winter deepened, and with it came a routine that Margaret had never experienced before. Stability. Each morning she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Nathaniel moving quietly through the cabin, always careful not to disturb her. Luna had taken to sleeping at the foot of her bed, the lynx's warm presence a comfort against the mountain cold. The work was hard but purposeful. Nathaniel taught her to check the trap lines, not for furs, he was quick to clarify, but to monitor animal populations and remove any illegal traps set by poachers. She learned to identify tracks in the snow, to read the forest signs, to move quietly through the winter landscape. "You're a natural," Nathaniel observed one day as they returned from checking the eastern ridge. "You have patience. Most people crash through the woods like they're trying to announce their presence to every creature within 5 miles. Margaret glowed at the praise, but old habits died hard. "I just move slowly because you're observant," he interrupted firmly. "Stop anticipating insults, Margaret. You're allowed to be good at something without qualifying it." It became a pattern, Nathaniel gently redirecting her negative self-talk, never harshly, but always consistently. At first, Margaret bristled at it, defensive, but gradually, she began to hear the difference between his corrections and the cruelty she'd experienced in Birchwood Hollow. He wasn't trying to change her. He was trying to help her see herself accurately. In the evenings, they read by firelight. Nathaniel had an impressive collection of books: philosophy, natural science, poetry, novels. Margaret devoured them hungrily, her mind expanding in ways she'd never imagined possible. They discussed ideas, debated interpretations, argued good-naturedly about characters' motivations. "You should have been a teacher," Nathaniel said one night after a particularly spirited discussion about Thoreau's ideas on civil disobedience. "Women don't become teachers where I come from. Not women like me, anyway." The bitterness crept into her voice before she could stop it. "Women like you, intelligent, articulate, thoughtful women," Nathaniel set down his book. "Or are you still defining yourself by what Birchwood Hollow decided you were?" The question hit hard. Margaret had no answer. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Nathaniel continued. "I see someone who survived years of cruelty without becoming cruel herself. Someone who learned to sew and cook and manage a household by herself as a child. Someone who reads philosophy and understands it. Someone, my lynx, who despises most humans, has adopted as family. When are you going to start seeing what I see?" "I don't know how," Margaret admitted, her voice breaking. "Then we'll practice. Every day I want you to tell me one thing you did well. Not something I tell you, something you recognize in yourself. Can you do that?" It seemed impossible, but she nodded. The practice started small. "I repaired the tear in the flour sack without wasting any grain. I identified a pine marten's tracks correctly. I made bread that actually rose properly." Each acknowledgement felt awkward, forced, like speaking a foreign language. But Nathaniel was patient, and slowly, so slowly Margaret barely noticed, the practice began to change something inside her. February brought a thaw, and with it, a visitor. Margaret was outside splitting kindling when she heard voices on the trail. Her blood turned to ice when she recognized one of them, Thomas Brennan, the ringleader of her tormentors from Birchwood Hollow. He emerged from the tree line with 2 other men, all carrying rifles. Luna, who had been lounging nearby, immediately went on alert, her ears flat, body coiled to spring. "Well, well, found you, Maggie." Thomas's smile was cruel. "Your daddy's been making noise about his daughter running off with the mountain man. Thought we'd come see if you needed rescuing." "I don't need anything from you." Margaret's voice shook, but she stood her ground. Luna moved to stand beside her, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "That cat needs to be put down," one of the other men said, raising his rifle. "Touch that lynx and you'll deal with me." Nathaniel appeared from the cabin, and there was nothing gentle in his demeanor now. He moved with lethal grace, positioning himself between the men and both Margaret and Luna. He wasn't carrying a rifle, but the long knife at his belt and the absolute confidence in his stance made it clear he didn't need one. Miss Hayes is here by her own choice, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had scattered Thomas's gang once before. If her father has concerns, he can bring them to me directly. Instead, he sent you. Why? Thomas's bravado faltered slightly. Just checking on her welfare is all. Her welfare. Nathaniel's tone made the words sound absurd. You, who spent years tormenting her, are concerned about her welfare. Tell me, Thomas, when did that concern develop? Before or after you realized she'd found somewhere safe from people like you? Now listen here. No, you listen. Nathaniel took a step forward, and even armed, the three men retreated. Margaret Hayes is under my protection. That means if you or anyone from Birchwood Hollow comes up this mountain to harass her, you'll answer me. And trust me, you don't want that conversation. Luna chose that moment to voice a sound that was part hiss, part growl, all threat. The effect was immediate. The men practically tripped over themselves backing away. This isn't over, Thomas tried to maintain some dignity. Yes, it is. Nathaniel's voice was final. Go back to town. Tell them Margaret is exactly where she wants to be. And if her father actually cares about her welfare, he's welcome to visit, sober, unarmed, and respectful. Otherwise, stay away. The men left, muttering threats they lacked the courage to act on. When they were gone, Margaret found herself shaking so hard she had to sit down on the chopping stump. I'm sorry, she gasped. I've brought trouble to you. No, Nathaniel knelt beside her. They brought trouble to themselves. You have nothing to apologize for. But they'll talk. The whole town will be saying things about us, about why I'm here. Let them talk. His voice was gentle but firm. Their gossip says more about them than about us. You know the truth. I know the truth. That's what matters. Luna rubbed against Margaret's legs. Her earlier aggression transformed back into affection. Margaret buried her fingers in the lynx's soft fur, drawing comfort from the contact. That night, she wrote in her journal, Today they came for me. And today, for the first time in my life, someone stood between me and cruelty without hesitation, not because he had to, but because he chose to, because he believes I deserve protection. I've been thinking about what Nathaniel asked. When will I start seeing what he sees? I think I'm beginning to understand the question. It's not about whether I'm worthy. It's about recognizing that worth isn't something others grant me. It exists regardless of their acknowledgement. I am valuable because I am human, because I survived, because I'm capable of kindness and thought and growth. The town's judgment doesn't define me. My father's rejection doesn't diminish me. They were wrong, as all of them. They were wrong. Spring came late to the high country, but when it arrived, it transformed the landscape. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the creek ran full with snowmelt. Margaret spent hours working in the small garden Nathaniel had helped her start, her hands in the soil, her face to the sun. The physical labor that had once exhausted her now felt strengthened. Her body was changing, not dramatically but definitively. She was building muscle, gaining endurance, moving with new confidence. One afternoon, Luna led her to a hidden glen where a family of fox kits played under their mother's watchful eye. Margaret sat quietly, observing, and realized with sudden clarity that she was happy, not content, not merely safe, actually happy. That evening she finally said what had been building inside her for months, I love you. The words fell into the quiet of the cabin like stones in still water. Nathaniel looked up from the knife he was sharpening, his expression unreadable. Margaret, I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I just needed to say it. You've given me so much. Safety, respect, friendship. But it's more than that for me. You make me believe I'm worth something. You make me want to be better. And I needed you to know. Nathaniel set down the knife and came to sit beside her. I need to tell you something. The reason I left civilization, the reason I came to these mountains, it wasn't just philosophical objection to greed and violence. I had a wife, Sarah. She died in childbirth, and the baby with her. It's been 8 years, but I carried that loss for so long that I convinced myself I didn't deserve to feel anything again. Margaret's heart ached for him. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you because I need you to understand. What I feel for you has been growing for months, but I've been afraid to name it. Afraid that loving again means risking that kind of loss again. He took her hand. But you've taught me something. You came up this mountain broken, convinced you were unworthy of love. And you did the work. You healed. You chose to save yourself. Watching that has been the most courageous thing I've ever witnessed. It's made me believe that maybe I can be brave too. Are you saying? I'm saying I love you, Margaret Hayes, not because I pity you or because you needed saving, but because you're brilliant and kind and strong in ways most people will never understand. You've survived things that would have destroyed someone weaker. And yes, it took me time to see past my own wounds to recognize that. But I see it now. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, but these were different. Tears of joy, of relief, of finally being seen completely and loved anyway. They kissed, tentative at first, then deeper, both of them learning that love could be gentle and fierce at once. Luna, apparently approving, chirped contentedly from her spot by the fire. When summer fully established itself, Margaret made the decision to return to Birchwood Hollow one final time. Not in defeat, but in closure. Nathaniel offered to come, but she needed to do this alone. The town looked smaller than she remembered. Margaret walked through the streets, and while some people stared, their reactions seemed muted, uncertain. Mrs. Chen emerged from her shop and embraced her warmly. You look well, child. Happy. The mountain suits you. It does, Margaret agreed. I came to see my father. The older woman's face clouded. He's not well, Margaret. The drink has taken him hard, but he's been asking for you. Margaret found her father in their old cabin, which had deteriorated even more in her absence. He looked old, diminished, the rage burned out of him, leaving only regret. Margaret, his voice was raspy. You came. I came to say goodbye, Papa, and to tell you something. She sat across from him, no longer afraid. What you did, the neglect, the cruelty, the violence, it wasn't my fault. I was a child who lost her mother and needed her father, and you weren't there. That's on you, not me. Her father's eyes filled with tears. I know. I've always known. I just didn't know how to stop drinking long enough to be the father you needed. I forgive you, Margaret said, and meant it, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of the anger. I'm building a life now, a good life, with people who value me. I hope you find peace, Papa, but I won't sacrifice my healing for your comfort anymore. B. She left him there, and with each step away from that cabin, she felt lighter. She stopped at Mrs. Chen's shop one more time, leaving her a gift, the beautiful embroidered tablecloth she'd been working on all spring. The older woman's tears of gratitude were blessing enough. On the trail back up the mountain, Margaret met Thomas Brennan. He looked uncomfortable, ashamed even. Margaret, I wanted to apologize for everything. I was cruel because I was miserable, and making you miserable made me feel powerful. It was wrong. Margaret studied him for a long moment. Thank you for saying that. I hope you become someone who doesn't need to hurt others to feel strong. She didn't wait for his response. She had said what needed saying, and his journey was his own. When she reached the cabin, Nathaniel was waiting on the porch, Luna beside him. The sight of them, her family, chosen and true, made her heart expand with gratitude. How did it go? Nathaniel asked. I said what I needed to say. I'm free now. She climbed the steps and kissed him. I'm home. That night they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Margaret thought about the girl she'd been, broken, convinced of her own worthlessness, surviving but not living. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, strong, purposeful, loved. She wrote one final entry in her journal. I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people, that I was too damaged, too different, too wrong to deserve it. But I've learned that happiness isn't something you're granted. It's something you build, piece by piece, choice by choice. I chose to run, I chose to stay, I chose to do the hard work of healing. I chose to love myself enough to believe I deserved love from others. And now I'm living a life I never imagined possible, here in these mountains with a man who sees my worth and a lynx who adopted me as family, in a place where I can be myself without fear. This is the life I've chosen. This is the life I've built. And it's beautiful, Luna chirped from her spot beside Margaret, pressing her head against Margaret's hand. Nathaniel squeezed her other hand gently, and together they watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The town below might never understand. Her father might never change. The cruelty of the world might never fully disappear. But here, in this cabin on the mountain, Margaret Hayes had found something more valuable than acceptance from those who had hurt her. She had found acceptance from herself, and that, she finally understood, was the only acceptance that truly mattered. The future stretched before her, full of possibility. There would be challenges. There always were. But she would face them not as the broken girl who had fled Birchwood Hollow, but as the woman who had chosen to save herself. And that made all the difference.